Universal basic income is being proposed in Canada. Is it going to actually help people, or is it just communism under another name? Before we get into this, let's have a look at the timeline of Venezuela. Venezuela is kind of the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the civilized world. I mean, it should have been other nations, Cuba, or maybe the Soviet Union, China, all these other places we could look back and see what communism has done for them. But no, Venezuela is probably one of the more recent ones that we can have a look. So in 1992, it became the third richest country in the hemisphere. 97 became the second largest purchaser of F-150s. 2001, wow, this isn't so long ago, voted for socialist president under income inequality. 2004, private healthcare is completely socialized. 2007, a higher education becomes free, in quotes. It's got to be in quotes. Money doesn't grow on trees and governments don't have any. 2009, socialists banned private ownership of guns. 2012, Bernie Sanders praised their American dream. 2014, opposition leaders are imprisoned. Whoa, starting to go somewhere bad. 2016, food healthcare shortages become widespread. I think we're already there in Canada. 2017, constitution and elections are suspended. 2019, unarmed citizens massacred by their own government. It only took one generation of progressive leadership to plunge this country into civil war. And it got so bad there that people were breaking into the zoos so that they could kill the animals and eat them. Now, here we are in Canada. A survey finds alarming amount of Canadians are uncomfortably close to broke, reports True North News. Insolvency firm MNP Limited released a report that revealed more and more Canadians are faced with crippling debt as high costs spike interest rates, making it more difficult for them to meet their payments. The report was latest consumer debt index for NNP, which found that 51% of Canadians are $200 or less away from not being able to meet their bills, while the amount of money the average person has left over after expenses has dropped to $674 this quarter. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous how impoverished Canadians are. And while we're doing that, we're just raising taxes. And we're raising taxes in ways that people don't even see. They're not seeing how these taxes are affecting them because they're getting taxed in ways like the carbon tax, which taxes every good and service because everything has to be delivered to you. All of these things are getting more expensive because of this. And then, of course, the inflationary tax. And this is the government spending money that they don't actually have. So they're issuing new currency, issuing bonds at the Bank of Canada, and inflating the money supply, which basically just takes any savings that you have saved up over the years and dilutes it by lowering the value of the currency itself. Now we're moving into the territory of universal basic income. This is what's being proposed here in Canada.
It is my privilege, honor, and responsibility to be the sponsor of Bill S-233, which we've just commenced study of in the Senate Standing Committee on Finance. The bill would introduce a framework to develop a guaranteed livable basic income. Right now is the fact that we are struggling throughout this country with homelessness, food insecurity, poverty, health, mental health issues, and this is one way that we could start to look at these issues. It's not the only way, but it's certainly a key way.
Is this the reason, perhaps, that we have all these insecurities? Is because the government's spending all of our money willy-nilly on all kinds of things? I don't know if just handing out money to people is the absolute way out of this. Now, the bill here, the Guaranteed Livable Income Bill in the Senate, that's S-233, and a similar bill in the House of Commons, S-223, advocate for universal basic income, or to be precise, a guaranteed livable basic income for all the residents of Canada. All of the residents of Canada. Remember this because this is important. The bill's call on the Canadian Finance Ministry to develop a national framework for a coast-to-coast guaranteed livable basic income program for anybody over the age of 17, including temporary workers, permanent residents, and refugee claimants. Now, the argument here is that immediately this would just be an incentive not to go to work, not to even pursue getting a job, but just to sit on your butt and play Xbox from the age of 17, or PlayStation, whatever you prefer. I don't know. I'm not going to get into some console war here on my YouTube video, but the incentive immediately would be that of, just no incentive to go to work. Then later, as this takes effect and inflates the entire economy, would go through some massive inflation, and we're going to get into exactly why. But it would render that whatever money that the government gives everybody the new zero. It'll essentially make it the new zero, and this is where things could get really complicated, because if you don't get that money, if you don't apply for it, now a negative number becomes, or just zero, regular zero becomes a negative number for anyone, and then they could use this as a political tool to basically say, oh, if you don't agree with us, we'll just take that away from you. You don't think that they might do that? Well, look back at what they did to a bunch of protesters that went to Ottawa last January, and we'll see how you think about that after looking at that. Now, this is someone who's also considering the plan. This would happen to be the number 2 in command to Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre is the leader of the Conservative Party. This is Melissa Lantsman talking about how basic income is an inevitability in Canada.
Well, there's some political parties now saying, Melissa, that they want to have this as a steady thing, the minimum income.
Well, you know what? I actually do somewhat agree with that, and there's a conservative position on this. The universal income benefit, the thing that you're talking about, where you're giving people a living wage, that's gonna come. And it could be that by a different name.
Doesn't sound very conservative to me, Melissa.
I actually think conservatives can own this, because you know what it does do? It does take government out of the mix of a bunch of means-tested programs thrown out of Ottawa by a bunch of bureaucrats, and gives everybody that thing that they need to get back to work, and we put that onto people. And we believe in them, and we try to get them out of poverty.
How are future governments going to pay for that?
I think that any government that wants to bring this forward is a government that's going to need a mandate from the people.
Absolutely. So,
yeah, you're going to need a mandate from the people. But is this going to be something that's going to be viable in Canada? Now, where's the Conservative position that could possibly have come about from this? Well, it's a bit of a different story. This is Milton Friedman talking about welfare, and he had a proposed idea of a reverse income tax. A really interesting thing, but it is not, in fact, a universal basic income, and let's get into why. Now, this is Milton Friedman, the late great Milton Friedman, economist from America, talking about how the welfare system actually incentivizes people not to work when people are stuck on welfare. Literally, how they get stuck on welfare is because if they take a job, they'll end up getting less than they would if they were to stay on welfare in the first place, and also risk losing the job at some point and then putting themselves months and months out from ever getting back on the welfare system.
The people who get on welfare lose their human independence and feeling of dignity. They become subject to the dictates and whims of their welfare supervisor, who can tell them whether they can live here or there, whether they may put in a telephone, what they may do with their lives. They're treated like children, not like responsible adults. And they're trapped in the system. Maybe a job comes up that looks better than welfare, but they're afraid to take it, because if they lose it after a few months, it may be 6 months or 9 months before they can get back onto welfare. And as a result, this becomes a self-perpetuating cycle, rather than simply a temporary state of affairs. For the past 7 years, Maureen Ramsey has had to buy food and clothes for her family out of a government handout. For the whole of that time, her husband, Steve, hasn't had a job.
The jobs around now these days, you only come up with about £45 a week. And then you deduct your stamp out of that, you still finish up with about £39. So what good is it working? When you still get the same thing, you know what I mean?
Of
So
course.
if you didn't understand the accent there, he was saying that, you know, if you take a job these days, you're only going to get about this much money, and they'll just deduct that from you anyway. So what's the point of even getting that? So people will just stay home. They'll refrain from taking jobs. And so he had an idea, and this is his pitch here for a, and he didn't call it a universal basic income. And this is Thomas Sowell's channel. He was a colleague of Milton Friedman's and has been continuing his work. But he says Milton Friedman's least bad plan to eliminate social welfare. It's not universal basic income. Have a listen.
Or should I say the least bad solution I have ever been able to devise is something called the negative income tax. This is the idea that we should get rid of a large part of the welfare bureaucracy and of the demeaning rules, that we should help people who are poor fundamentally by giving them money. With the positive income tax, you're entitled to a certain amount of personal exemptions and deductions, and above that amount you pay tax. But suppose you have no income. Under a negative income tax, a fraction of your unused exemptions would be paid to you by the government, guaranteeing at least a minimum income. If you earned something, you'd still get a fraction of your unused exemptions, and you'd end up better off. As your earnings rose, the supplement to your income would become smaller and smaller until your earnings equaled your exemptions. At that point, you'd break even, neither paying tax nor receiving a subsidy. It's not an ideal system. It's not the system we might have liked to get into, but it's a system which would have the effect of eliminating the separation of the society into those who receive and those who pay.
So I'll leave links in the description down below. I don't necessarily agree with this system as it's being proposed here. And Milton Friedman goes into long discussions about this. And again, link in the description. Explore this idea for yourself. But where I disagree is as you get closer to the threshold in which people would break even and then not get any pay from the government, there's a gray area there where people will prefer their own free time to any of this extra payments, and you know, when they prefer their own free time, they'll just sit on the dole, and it's a cost to the taxpayer in that scenario. But what he's also advocating for in this system is that the entire welfare bureaucracy be gone, and that would include unemployment, all of these different systems, in favor of a negative income tax. So if you just don't earn, then you get paid in that system. It's completely different from the universal basic income in that everyone would receive no matter one individual's income level or need. And this is based out of the Toronto Star's article. Canada is considering a guaranteed universal basic income program. Here's what that means. And they go over this. It means that, you know, everybody will get a X amount of money from the government every month, regardless of who you are, how much money you make. You could be, I mean, I guess Elon Musk, he's technically a Canadian, so he'll be getting it too, you know, that kind of thing. But they're saying that the push for a basic income program gained more momentum during the COVID-19 pandemic as Canada's Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, which was paid out $2,000 a month to millions of Canadians, raised the possibility of a permanent income program. You know what else CERB did? It created a huge jobs surplus. We had too many jobs and nobody applying for those jobs. It was a big economic problem in Canada, and a lot of like entry-level positions had to start raising the bar and paying tremendous amounts of money in order to, like, right in the town I live in here in British Columbia, they were offering $19 an hour to start to go work at Wendy's or Tim Hortons, that kind of place. It is ridiculous that they were offering that, but it's because they're you know, at par with getting paid to do nothing, which a lot of people opted to do. In fact, a lot of people, you know, leaving their jobs. I know this on the sly. Some people that did this, but people would leave their jobs and then work under the table while they could collect this as well. And that's obviously an issue for the government. But here's just the basic numbers here. And it doesn't take a genius to pull this out, but pull out a calculator, and they telling us that the below $27,000 is the poverty line in Canada. If you make less than $27,000, that is, you're poor. You're poor. You're not, that is poverty in Canada. Now, how much is that a month? That's $22.50. So $22,250. That's already a little bit more than what Serb was paying, but they want to call it a living wage. If it's not a living wage, then it's, or if a living income, it's not, it can't be below the poverty line. So how much would that be for the taxpayer if they did this? 1.08 trillion dollars on the taxpayer's dime for this. That, of course, is a lot of money. It's actually it's half of our GDP. Our entire GDP is $2.139 trillion. So half of our GDP paid out to every single Canadian. Where are they going to get that money? Where they're going to get that money? Well, they're going to get it by inflating the currency, by printing it and just handing it out. This is, it's inflationary, and it'll cause more of the same problems that we're seeing now if they implement this. I don't get how nobody gets this. Anyway, here's a bit more of Milton Friedman on the irresponsibility of other people's money. Because this is what you have to understand. The government doesn't have any money. The government just has your money. If you're a worker, if you're working, they have your money. They take it by force, and they do things with it. So what is it about other people's money that people feel so enthusiastic to spend it much more recklessly than they would spend their own money?
If I'm going to do good with other people's money, I first have to take it away from them. That means that the welfare state philosophy of doing good with other people's money, at its very bottom, is a philosophy of violence and coercion. It's against freedom, because I have to use force to get the money. In the second place, very few people spend other people's money as carefully as they spend their own. Let me take this down to the situation in New York City right now. About 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, I've forgotten when it was, John Kenneth Galbraith, in an article he wrote in the New York Times magazine section, said, there are no problems in New York City that would not be solved if the New York City budget were twice what it is now. Now, the New York City budget has since then something like tripled, and all the problems are worse. Why? Because the fact is that it's a confusion to identify the city with the people. The New York City's budget is higher, but that means that the people of New York have less to spend. It's only been transferred from people individually to the city. Now, who spends the money?
Absolutely. Now, I'll leave all the links in the description down below so everyone can check out these links. These are not new ideas. This is what needs to really be conceptualized by most people today. The reason why it was in black and white and it looked like old CRT stuff, it's because this is old. These are old ideas, and they're just being rehashed as new ideas, just as well as socialism, communism, all these different ideas. The idea that the free market is a bad thing. The free market is largely why we have prosperity in the first place, because of the free market that we had for X amount of time before the government started pulling its noose tighter and tighter on the economy and on entrepreneurs that have been largely the reason why we have so much wealth in our nation. Anyway, leave a comment in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think. Are you a supporter of UBI, or are you kind of on the fence? Did this presentation let you see things differently from where you used to see it before watching this? Anyway, leave a comment in the comment section down below, and we'll see you in the next one. Keep on trucking.